Hello and welcome to the NewsX Sunday Guardian Roundtable. Well, today we are discussing a topic that is being discussed in WhatsApp groups, in chat rooms, on TV channels, but somehow we can never have enough of a discussion on this. I'm, of course, talking about the pandemic that is raging all around us and doesn't really seem to be ending. India is now ratcheted up to, I think we have the second highest number of cases after the US. Our cases tally is up to 52 lakh with as much as 90,000 cases per day. The only silver lining, if there is any, is that our mortality rate has come down from 1.7 to 1.64 in the last week of 10 days. But just to take a reality check at what exactly is happening, where are we vis-a-vis the pandemic? What are the COVID cures? Where is the vaccine? And also, what are the complications? Because now we are seeing it's not just COVID, we're also dealing with post-COVID complications. We are also, a lot of myths that were there about the virus are now being busted. People are also getting the virus the second time around. Secondly, we're also talking about a second wave of COVID. What are the, basically, we've learned a lot more about the disease as we are facing it. So to educate the public, to try and figure out where we stand, I have with me a panel of doctors. I have Dr. Romel Tikku. He is the Associate Director of Internal Medicine at Max. Dr. Atul Kakkar, he's the Vice Chairman Internal Medicine at the Sri Gangaram Hospital. Dr. Manish Baijal, he's the director at the Institute of Laparoscopy, Endoscopy and Bariatrics at Max also. Dr. Tikku, where are we exactly on COVID today? The cases are rising. There is a silver lining, but I think there is also a lot to be alarmed about. So, where does India stand today?
Well, we are second on the list now, and it was expected, and soon we might be number one. But it's beyond us now, beyond the numbers. We're not really worried about the numbers. India always had to be number two or number one in the numbers because of a huge population and the kind of healthcare infrastructure that we have and the economic resources and the slums in the big cities. Numbers had to go up. And now with the economy opening and people going to offices, taking public transport, the flights having started, the migrant laborers going back to their towns, villages, and the overseas workers coming from Gulf, and all this has led to a spike. Besides the fact that we are testing a lot more, we've done more than 50 million tests now. And we are also increasing the tests each and every day. For at least the last couple of weeks, we've been doing 1 million tests a day. And that's a huge number. India is third on the list. We've done more tests than any country. In fact, only China and US has done more tests than India. So that is why the numbers have gone up. But as you rightly said, the positives are the mortality rate, which has gone down further now from 1.7 to 1.6%. And even the recovery rate is very good. Excellent recovery rate, 78%. So most of the people are getting better and going back home. In fact, last week we had 70,000 odd discharges in a day for 2-3 days. So recovery rate is excellent. And now that we are wiser in the disease, it's the 6th month and we know the complications, the post-COVID complications, and we are admitting patients, being very proactive and giving them everything, whether it's the antivirals, whether it's the plasma, whether it's the steroids. Steroids have a big role in now, especially in the second week and when they develop respiratory distress and pneumonia. So even with patients who are at home, in fact, majority of the patients, we have about 10 lakh active cases in India right now, and majority of them are at home, under home isolation. Now, this home isolation thing has been a huge success for India. And this was something which became instant success in Delhi, and it was replicated elsewhere. So if you're getting better in the comforts of your home and you don't need hospitalization, nothing like it, but your health needs to be monitored by doctors, paramedical staff, nurses, and all that is happening. And in fact, that's the reason why our healthcare infrastructure hasn't collapsed like it did in Italy and other European countries. So we are doing fine on that front. Numbers, yes, we can't do much about it. But if we manage to provide beds, hospitalize those who have comorbidities or who have serious illness, then I think we'll be good enough to manage the cases. But as of now, we are doing well. The cases are being managed well. But the challenge is the disease spreading to the small cities, villages. And now that the big hospitals, as usual, they don't have beds in the ICUs, we are having a challenge as far as getting ICU beds is concerned, especially in the top hospitals like Gangaram, Max, Apollo, Fortis. So that is something which we have to work on, besides the fact that we also have to increase the RT-PCR testing. In Delhi, we're doing about 60,000 tests a day, but 50,000 tests are rapid antigen tests. And the problem with the rapid antigen test is that it can sometimes be false negative. So the sensitivity is only 50%. But again, the challenge with PCR testing is you need an infrastructure, you need more manpower, you need expertise. It's an expensive test. It takes more than 8 hours compared to rapid antigen. But if we manage to increase the number of PCR tests, we manage to ramp up the infrastructure further, get more ICU beds. And anyways, we are using plasma and whatever treatment is required. And under home isolation, keep a close track. Now, Delhi government has given pulse oximeters to patients who are at home, and if their oxygen levels start dropping, so the moment it happens, ambulance services are being provided, they're brought to the hospital. So whatever is being done is, I think, a big thing for India. A country like India, we were expecting lots of fatalities in India, but that hasn't happened. People predicted millions of people would die. That hasn't really happened. But we don't have to get complacent. The other issue is with people, they have become very complacent. There's a sense of fatigue which is set in. They're not wearing masks as usual. Even in the last two, whatever.
I'll go into that in a bit. Let me get the others in also, Dr. Tiku.
So,
Dr. Kakkad, he's given us a very comprehensive picture of how we are handling the challenge. That is for people who have COVID. But after recovering from COVID, you've been doing a lot of research on the post-COVID complications that are occurring. So can you share those with us?
Very true. Now, we are getting patients back with post-COVID, complications. We've had patients who had, lung involvement in the form of lung fibrosis. Then we've had patients with heart involvement, then with pancreas involvement. In fact, our hospital was the first one to tell, that pancreas is also involved in, COVID. And there is something which is called a chronic fatigue syndrome, which is associated with COVID, which is to the tune of almost about 30 to 40%. They come back with the fatigue, with shortness of breath, with sleep disorders, with symptoms of anxiety. This is the main thing which these patients are coming back with. So this is awareness needs to be there about this. Besides this, there are lots of other systems involved, the eyes involved, the brain, in case it's involved, it can lead to something like encephalitis, encephalopathy. It can affect the nerves, the muscles. So if you see right from the endocrinal system to the brain, to the lungs, to heart, to a GI system, majority of the systems are involved. And now when we get the patients back, we are looking at these complications and try to solve and finding the link between the two.
And are you finding more patients getting COVID twice, COVID recovered patients coming back to you?
We are receiving patients who have had COVID and they have upper respiratory tract because influenza is also in now. So we are getting those, but reinfection of COVID we have not seen. There's been just a case report in the literature which has said that reinfection with COVID is possible. In fact, that's a single case report which is based upon the Hong Kong patient who had recovered fully, and he was cleared by a medical test also. And then he traveled to some place in Europe and came back and was tested positive. However, that patient also was not symptomatic. So it also depends upon, whether we are catching an asymptomatic infection or is it just a variant of that with the infection. But yeah, post-COVID, we are seeing lots of other infections. We are seeing infections with other viruses like all respiratory virus, including influenza, CMV virus, which are now coming up in a very big way. So we need to be a little more aware about the co-infections, which may be because of low immunity and which may show a little later than the COVID when it's getting okay.
Manish, can you're also a surgeon, so can you talk about the non-COVID complications that are occurring, in the times of Corona?
Yeah, Priya, this is something what we call non-COVID complications. You see, today we anyways have a huge burden of COVID on our healthcare system. But what is happening today, that the routine diseases which will always stay in a certain percentage are being ignored by the patients because they are mortally scared to visit a hospital. So if you look at simple routine surgeries like gallbladder surgeries, hernia surgeries, what is the incidence of hernia? 1 in 10 men who are walking around would have a hernia. So it's almost 10% of the men population would have a hernia. Now, these are the surgeries. These patients usually used to walk in as a day case surgeries. Today, what is happening is, because they are sitting on the disease, we are doing more of obstructed or strangulated hernias rather than routine hernias. Similarly, gallbladder surgeries. It is the commonest surgical procedure that any general surgeon does in India. Because they are getting delayed, we are seeing patients with perforated gallbladders, gangrenous gallbladders, and more sepsis coming in. So typically, if a patient would spend about a day in the hospital, now you'll have patients staying for 3 to 4 days. They go back home on injectable antibiotics. So the morbidity is increasing that much. Now, what is important for our patients to understand is now we know the disease much better as compared to what we knew about the disease few months back. So safely done, these procedures should not be postponed because these are curative procedures, low morbidity surgeries in and out of the hospital quick. But if we postpone them, of course, the morbidity increases and the suffering of the patients increase. So the healthcare system not only has a challenge of COVID patients today, but it is because of the parallel side effects that we are seeing on other healthcare diseases is something which, if not bigger, but maybe equally big.
And Dr. Tikku, we're also seeing, especially in these days, there's also dengue that's going around. So are you seeing a lot of cases with the COVID and dengue? Because the symptoms are very similar also. So that must be adding to the confusion as well.
Fortunately, this season, we're not seeing too much of dengue, but yes, there is an overlap. And I've seen a couple of cases where they had dual infection with dengue and COVID also. So that is something which is new. We haven't seen it earlier in the last 2-3 months, but this is the dengue season. But as I said, fortunately, not too much of dengue. But there are cases where they have typhoid, they have dengue, and then we test for COVID, and that also comes positive. And it's a big challenge treating such patients because then you need fluids also, you need antibiotics also, then you need COVID-specific management also. So that's a huge challenge. But dengue season is almost over, another month or so. So hopefully the cases would not increase. But yes, we are seeing a mixed bag, a lot of acute gastroenteritis. And now the other thing which is coming is they're presenting with GI complaints. They're presenting with vomiting, diarrhea. I've seen a lot of patients in the last couple of weeks who just had abdominal pain, diarrhea, and vomiting. And they were found to be COVID positive. So atypical presentations are pretty common now where you wouldn't even suspect that the patient has COVID. So somebody coming with just fever, body ache, you think it's dengue, but it turns out to be COVID. So one has to be really vigilant, especially the physicians, because even if the COVID is negative, then you have a tendency to think that maybe it's negative, maybe it's COVID, but we have to think about the other illnesses as well, dengue, typhoid, or maybe some other virus, or maybe flu. As Dr. Kakkar said, this is the season of flu now. In the next couple of months, we'll have the flu season coming in. And this is the right time actually to get vaccinated against flu. And be careful with food, water, waterborne diseases are common in monsoon. So yes, we are seeing lots of cases where you have lots of other infections. But yeah, fortunately for us, we don't see too much of dual infections. But yes, as Dr. Kakkar said, complication post-COVID, we have to be very careful, whether it's the pancreas, whether it's the lungs. A lot of people who had pneumonias and were on ventilator or BiPAP for a long time are developing fibrosis, they're needing oxygen even at home. And certain cardiac patients, diabetics or elderly, they're having issues. Pulmonary embolism or clots or strokes are pretty common post-COVID. Not to that extent, but yeah, we do see a percentage of people where they can have such complications. So we have to be really careful, even post-COVID, once you're out of the hospital or out of home isolation, post those 2 weeks, one has to be very careful. One has to keep doing those tests maybe every a week or 10 days and be in touch with doctors. Don't get into the exercise mode. A lot of patients keep asking me post recovery that shall we start going to the whatever gym or whatever exercising at home. So they're so impatient, especially the younger lot. But I think for 2 to 4 weeks, you should take it easy. Your immunity is low. You might catch some other infection. You might catch dengue or you might get pneumonia, bacterial pneumonia or something. So one has to be really careful. And the younger lot especially has to be very careful because they are the ones who are up and about, who are mobile, who go out, they are out for work. And once they might have asymptomatic or mild disease, but once they come back home, they give it to their parents, their grandparents, and one of them might have a problem. They might have diabetes and all that stuff. So we have to be really careful when it comes to COVID, because we are 6 months old in the disease, but we still don't know a lot about the disease. We're learning something every day. Something new is coming up every day. So one has to be really very vigilant about the disease.
And Dr. Gaffer, when people talk about a second wave of COVID, I'm always a bit perplexed, because I think the first wave is not yet over. So we're still, did we deal with the first wave? There's a second wave, or can you explain generally what is happening? Because
see, the concept of second wave was from, if you think about the Spanish flu, historically it had 3 waves, distinct waves. The second wave is once the first wave has finished or decreased, the number of patients have decreased and suddenly there's a surge. And the surge is because of the new infections, new number of people getting the new infection. That's the second phase basically. Most likely we are entering into a second phase with the numbers, increasing or surging in the last few days. Still, it's very difficult to say, but yeah, this is what we need to worry about, because after this, the infection is going to spread in the community, and we need to be very careful about this, because it's not the question just because of the numbers. If we can't match the infrastructure with the, the facility which we have, it's going to be very difficult little later.
And Dr. Vaidil, I heard Dr. Tikku say something about the fact that, COVID behavior fatigue. Are you also seeing that in your patients? People is it like ab hoga to hoga kind of a thing? Or as you're saying, they're still scared?
Yes, it's called chronic fatigue syndrome. It's also called myalgia encephalitis syndrome. And the COVID virus, it enters the brain through the nose. And once it enters the nose, it causes a lot of problems. These patients, they get okay, they are discharged from the hospital, they keep complaining of fatigue, they can't get up, the weakness is there, they feel dyspneic. If you check the okay, they have disturbances of the sleep, the mood, these are the things, which are going to be carried out for a little longer time. And if you see the various studies, which, the incidence available outside is almost 30 to 40% of the patients are going to have it for 3 to 6 months. It means there's a huge amount of patients are going to have this kind of symptoms, which are going to be lined up for them. And that's why, awareness of this kind of syndrome is very important. It is little difficult to manage, but perhaps it's important to patients so that, at least you're aware of what's happening with these patients.
And Manish, how are you seeing the public? Are you seeing that people becoming more aware of wearing masks, or the patients now, everybody saying, "Chalo, COVID to hoga, so hoga," but
So very clearly, what we see around is 2 extremes actually. People who are extremely, extremely particular, who would not step out without a good mask, or probably 2 masks, one on top of each other. And then we have the other extreme that we see actually more often when we get out on roads. Or actually, I visited the airport yesterday night, and I was literally mortally scared of looking at the crowds around, how they moved around without any mask, without any awareness. So I think what you have done as media, what government has done, they've done a lot for this awareness, but still it's not there in majority of the public around. So when we see these patients in our hospital, where people who are coming to the OPD, patients are pretty clear on one side that we cannot wait anymore. This is going to stay. And of course, then we have more on the other side who still refuse to visit the hospital, and they keep suffering. There was a very nice article which talked about the number of chemotherapy sessions the patients missed during the last 4 months. So these patients would have more advanced diseases in times to come because of they're missing their sessions. So this is what we are seeing. Though we are trying to create more and more awareness, we still do not have patients who who would follow your instructions and who would be happier challenging everything that you say scientifically.
And Dr. Tikku, any progress on the cures that work? Initially I remember the advisories, take paracetamol, then the people talk about remdesivir. Is there any progress in the last month or so? I think you and we've had a conversation after quite a while. So now what do you advise your patients?
Well, not really. We're still using the same stuff. We're still using remdesivir. We're using the plasma. We're using the steroids. And nothing new has come up. But
is it easily available, or is it still difficult to get hold of?
Well, now I think it's pretty easy to get the remdesivir. Plasma is a challenge because you have to get a donor, and then it has to match the blood group and all that. And people are very reluctant to donate plasma, especially once they've been out of the hospital. But yes, remdesivir I don't think is a challenge. Tocilizumab, which we're using for patients with cytokine storm, that was a challenge at some point, but I think that is also available now. And steroids anyway are cheap, easily available, and steroids have actually a big role now, and especially in patients who are in the ICU or in respiratory distress. So steroids are actually saving lots of lives. So antibiotics and the other stuff is anyway available, but nothing specific in COVID as of now. We're still using the old drugs. We're using doxycycline, azithromycin, those antibiotics, ivermectin. These are the drugs which we've been using over the years. Nothing specific. Remdesivir, yes, but I'm not too sure about remdesivir also, as in how much it really helps. Because even in the studies, it hasn't reduced mortality to a great extent. And even the other drug, favipiravir, it's a mixed bag. I personally don't have a very good experience with that drug, and lots of side effects. People don't tolerate it. The dose is huge. You have to take 9 tablets morning, evening on day 1, and then 4 tablets for the next few days. So lots of issues related to that. But by and large, majority of the people are asymptomatic still and have mild disease and are getting better with just basic stuff like paracetamol and maybe some azithromycin or anti-allergic tablets. But the ones who are in the hospital, and now that we know that we have to be a little proactive with using steroids, especially if they have a pneumonia, we are very proactive with CT scans now. The moment the patient gets into the second week of illness and the saturation starts hitting 92, 93, so we're getting a CT scan done, and depending on the CT severity score, depending on their oxygen saturation, their comorbidities and age, then we put them in the ICU, give them steroids and antivirals. Plasma also, again, plasma, it's again debatable. Lots of studies say that it actually doesn't help much because the titers have to be high. It has to be given in mild to moderate disease, not when the patient is really sick and on the verge of getting ventilated. It doesn't really help at that point. So lots of, Dr. Manish has to add something.
I don't have to add anything here. After you've spoken this, you did speak about the flu vaccine in times to come. I think there is always a big question around, even in the doctors community, how important is it to take this flu vaccine every winter, approaching winter, and does it have any benefit having cross immunity between these viruses? So that's a big question, and I think if Romil or Atul could highlight on this, this would be beneficial for our public at large.
Yeah, Manish, vaccine has to be taken, like that's there are age groups where we give it, and it is protective against influenza and also the H1N1 strain. So this is indicated for any elderly patient or patients who are at risk because of kidney involvement, heart involvement, on chemotherapy and certain other things, including pregnancy. So those are the indications for giving the vaccine. It is available. There are 2 types of vaccine. One is a trivalent and the other is a quadrivalent. So quadrivalent is thought to be a little better than the trivalent vaccine which is available. And it's available for the last now almost 4-5 weeks now with us. And we're using it. It has to be given. There is, it perhaps will not protect you against anything else except for influenza and H1N1, which is also a type of influenza. Beyond that, and we need to wait for the the vaccine for corona, till if you want that, it can protect you for that or not.
Dr. Tikku, winter is coming. The common myth was that, in winter it's more severe than in summer. So, or has that been busted? It's severe regardless winter, summer.
I don't think it
Dr.
has
Tikku.
anything to do with the humidity, with the temperature or the climate. It doesn't follow any rule. So we don't know. Maybe it will actually go down in winter. Who knows? The way the graph is going, in the next 2-3 months, finally the graph will start going down and then we might have a fall in the numbers. I think by Jan, Feb, probably the numbers would go down. And that might actually coincide with the vaccine coming in because it's expected in the first quarter of the next year. So if we have a vaccine, in fact, there are more than 5 vaccine candidates in the phase 3 trials, human trials now, and hopefully one of them would click. We have the Moderna, the Pfizer from US, the Oxford. These are the 3 front runners for the vaccine. So if one of them actually is successful in completing the phase 3 trials, then the numbers going down in India might coincide with actually the vaccine coming in. And hopefully by April, we might be able to get rid of COVID. That's what I hope.
Wow, that is an optimistic note. Dr. Thakkar, anything to add on the vaccine front before I end?
No, vaccine is okay, but one thing I like to add is that, if you see the newspapers, we have a herd immunity of close to about 33%. So in 6 months, if we can achieve 33%, it means at least 6 months more we'll require to receive, at least to reach about 70% or not. So at 70%, if the immunity is there for the community, that's the time when the transmission will be less. So I don't think it's going to end very soon. It's going to take at least another 6 months before we achieve that number of 70.
Manish, any final word?
You're asking me?
Yeah, Dr. Vaijal, yes.
I don't think so. Any one of us would have a final word so soon. But earlier we have it, better it is for all of us. So let's have our optimistic thinking going and let's have this behind us sooner than later. So let's take our precautions, stay safe, and go on with our life. That's what is required.
Final word, but a note of optimism. Definitely, we hope that we're rid of this pandemic sooner rather than later. But in the meantime, I'm going to call you all back again and keep us all updated on what is happening in terms of cures, in terms of behavior, in terms of what to look out for and how to best protect ourselves. But thank you so much for joining me on this panel, and also thank you all for watching this show. Thank you.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.